Hey everyone, my name is Ben Gromicko. I'm from InterNACHI, that's the International Association of Certified Home Inspectors. And we train and certify home inspectors all over the world. And that's at nachi.org. Today is an InterNACHI webinar. And we have a special guest, Andrew Sams. He's from Alpine Building Performance. That's alpinebuildingperformance.com. He's in the Denver area in Colorado. And he's a certified master inspector, certified home inspector, certified professional inspector, BPI building analyst, energy auditor. He does sewer scopes. He does everything. And what I really enjoy is when we have an experienced master inspector who's interested in sharing and giving back. So I asked Andrew to come on InterNACHI webinars and walk us through a home inspection. And I believe he's got a report that he's brought up, and we're going to walk through the inspection using the report. Andrew, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule.
Of course, thanks, Ben. My pleasure to be here, and you know, InterNACHI's been just critical to my professional development growth and that of our whole team. I started off 5 years ago here in the Denver market, and so right down the street from InterNACHI, and it was just me at the time, and I've been fortunate. I've grown a great team to this day. We've got 5 inspectors, including myself, and some in training. So we've been really fortunate to have a good run here over the past 5 years, and yeah, couldn't do it without you know, all the great training we get and the great resources. So I'm happy to be here.
And because you're a building analyst, you've studied building science. And you know, when I teach home inspectors, I teach them that a house is a system. A bunch of parts intermingled together. When one part isn't working very well, it'll affect other parts.
It's so true. It's so true. And that's really what I love about this is, you know, is being able to analyze the home as a system, and that you of course have all these different systems, but they're not isolated. I mean, everything is tied together. And I think that's when things really start to click, is when you can kind of tie different parts and different systems together and really figure out what's going on. You know, there's a lot of elements of an inspection that are pretty cut and dry, but there's, you know, a lot of these problem solving scenarios where you really have to apply that building science mentality and figure things out. And I think that's when it gets really fun for me personally.
Speaking of solving problems during an inspection, what are the challenges in business? What are your biggest challenges or goals right now in your business?
Sure. You know, I really right now, I would say it's kind of our internal training. You know, we use InterNACHI. I mean, all of our inspectors are InterNACHI certified, and that's a great, you know, jumping off point to get the guys ready to really then start training in the field. And so, you know, we have a really high standard for our inspectors, and running them through all of the different scenarios that you come across in the course of this profession is really what we've been focusing on lately. And so, you know, honestly, kind of doing that in-field training in conjunction with just being busy, it has been a challenge. And so we've been working on that a lot, trying to really kind of piggyback on InterNACHI training, and kind of develop our own curriculum to prepare everybody for what they see in the field. You know, and it's not just, I'm really a big believer on the kind of communication and personality side of the business, as well as the technical side. And so, you know, really training our guys, you know, on how to handle certain situations, how to handle interactions, working, you know, the different types of clients you come across, that kind of thing, and, you know, what to do if certain problems arise. I mean, I just, you know, pulled up to a house yesterday afternoon, and no one was there, and there was a dog barking at me through the window inside the house, and you know, so just little nuances like that. But I would say that's kind of been the big challenge lately, as we're growing.
Well, I've seen your website, alpinebuildingperformance.com, and I've seen your team. That one inspector, Matthew, he should be I don't know, he came from the NFL or something. He looks.
I know he's a linebacker. Yeah, no, Matt's great. We've he's been with us a year, yeah, good old Iowa farm boy. So I love it. You know, just he's been on. Never hear from him. He just gets the job done. So
One
yeah,
interesting, one interesting thing I saw is it's a local thing, but it could be spreading around the country, is rental units being
yes,
required to be inspected by a certified home inspector. And
yes.
Denver recently did something like that, and you're involved in that.
Yes, we are. So we really want to be, you know, kind of on the forefront of that in the Denver market. You know, Boulder, as you know, has, you know, regulatory requirements around rentals and then the Smart Regs program. But the city and county of Denver is adopting a residential rental license program. And so basically, without getting too far in the weeds, it's by 2024, January 1st, 2024, Denver's going to require all of the rental units to pass an inspection. So I think this will be one situation where an inspection is actually a pass or fail situation. So the definitive checklist for the inspection is due out sometime by March 2022. So we're hoping to get it sooner rather than later so we can get started. But we're definitely encouraging people not to wait on on this program. So,
well, speaking of not waiting and getting started, why don't you take us through one of your inspections here? I see 1234 Main Street.
Yeah. So pulled up a sample report. You know, of course, we've got a lot of reports to pull from, and leading up to today, I was really trying to pick my brain on what would be a good example. And then we had an interesting situation happen yesterday, and I actually figured this would kind of be a good training scenario as well. You know, we've been in business 5 years, and we've actually never had such a kind of crude email from a listing agent before as we had yesterday. And it was actually on this inspection. So I figured it would be a good example to kind of pull from. So Owen, who you see here, he's our lead inspector. He's a certified master inspector as well. And he's been with me since almost the beginning, but he actually did this inspection here in Denver on Saturday. As you'll see, you can see here, we've got 18 minor items, 57 moderate, which is quite a few, and then 10 major health and safety. And as you'll see, as we go through the report, you know, nothing is really egregious. It's all very, you know, really by the book. But it was interesting because the listing agent sent us a reply email, because we always follow up with both listing and buyers agents and just say, you know, thanks for the opportunity. We always welcome any feedback. And he said, you're a deal killing hack. If I ever see your company ever again, I will not allow you on the property. So, which was actually a threat. But I just thought that was interesting because we pride ourselves on not being deal killers, just being being there for education. But I thought it was interesting. He kind of let his emotions get the best of him, and we just had to brush it off. Yeah. You know, I just said, thanks for your feedback. And you know, we kind of moved on. But it was interesting because he said, I won't let you on the property. And I'm like, that's not really up to you to make the decision. But I thought I would share that too, because, you know, that's kind of part of this profession as well, is just dealing with all the different parties. And I will say, in 5 years, we've never had anything that hateful come up. But and I spoke with the buyer's agent, and she said everything was great. We really appreciated the insight. You know, my buyers decided to walk on this property. They were kind of already on the fence, and this was, you know, what we needed to see. So I first want to acknowledge this is not proper ladder setup or safety by the InterNACHI standards. You want 3 good rungs above the roof line.
That's all right.
But I figured what I'll do, I'll just kind of go through. I mean, would that be kind of the best format to just kind of walk through sections and.
Yeah, yep. And two things. If anybody wants to ask a question, feel free to use the Q&A feature on your side during the live presentation. And if you wanted to ask Andrew anything, it's alpinebuildingperformance.com. And but one question for you is we might as well go over what software are you using? I already know, but what software?
Yeah, sure. So we use Spectora software, which we absolutely love. They've been great. I think really just kind of in a nutshell, what I love about Spectora is the user interface and the ease of use for us as inspectors, and then also the ease of use for clients and agents. So it's a great software. It's all digital. And another great thing about Spectora is they're always innovating. So it's really cool to see. I mean, pretty much as soon as you think, oh, it would be nice if X, it just pops up, and they say, hey, we've got a new update. And I think they're really doing some great things. So on that note, for anyone that's unfamiliar with Spectora, as you can see here, this is kind of the layout that is the default. So if you're the client or the agent, this is the view you get, which basically takes you straight to the meat of the inspection. I mean, it's pretty much, hey, what did you guys find that needs to be addressed? And so you see by section, there's roof, we've got our items, exterior, we have our items. Now on these file tabs here, this is just the overview. So it takes you straight to the defects, but you can click on information and get all of the photos here, all the limitations, and then of course the NACHI standards of practice. And then there's also the option here, you can see full report, there's just a summary option, and then there's a major defects plus health and safety. You can go straight to all the red items here. So it's a really nice way to classify it. And then for the more kind of old school style, you can go to a PDF and then do the summary or the full report, which is the 90-page report there. But we found that agents love, and clients just say, hey, just show me what's wrong, and every once in a while, and it's interesting. I think you have so many different types of clients, and I think it's really important for inspectors to be able to kind of determine who they're working with and what their audience is. We'll have home buyers that are engineers and they want to know everything. They're like, just lay it on me, give me the detail. They just really want to dive in and kind of geek out with you. And then on the other, side, there's, your first time home buyers that are software engineers and they know nothing about a home, and sometimes they don't really want to know. They're just like, just tell me what's wrong. Like, I want to buy this house. I don't need the detail, we're like, here's your shut off valves. Here are the main items, let us know if you have any questions. So I think kind of, gauging your audience is just one thing that's really important on a more general scale. So we'll kind of walk through these items, and then I will, I guess, give you some of my philosophy as well, and like how we inspect and what we deem important, kind of how we classify things.
Sure.
So you'll see we have the blue, orange, and red categories. Essentially, the blue, the minor observations, are more cosmetic, surface level. Sometimes we use that as just, hey, we acknowledge this, but we're not necessarily recommending, that you do anything or not, but we did want to make, note of this. Or it's cosmetic items like a missing globe on a fixture or something like that, hey, while we're in this home and we're spending 3 hours on site, we want to give you all the information that we find, but we're putting this in more of like a punch list format. The orange is typically more of a you might want to do something about this. It might vary from a grading and drainage issue that we recommend that be taken care of, all the way to, hey, your furnace is past its service life. So definitely more attention there. And then the red items, which are the major defects or health and safety, as the name implies, it's either a really major item or it falls into the health and safety category. And then I think what's interesting about health and safety is that oftentimes, as you'll see in this report, the health and safety items, although they're red, they're usually really easy fixes. It's usually things like, missing, for us at least in our report template, missing smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors, open junction boxes, anti-tip brackets, things like that are easy fixes, but are something that do pose a health and safety risk.
Yep.
So our inspection details, we always capture this, pretty standard. We usually start, so for us, we typically start the first, on a 3-hour inspection, usually the first hour or so is roof, exterior, and the garage, if that's, if there is a garage. And then we move in and kind of hit more of our major systems. So electrical, plumbing, structure, attic, insulation, ventilation. And then kind of the last 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the configuration of the home, is interiors, plumbing fixtures, appliances, things like that. So that's typically our flow, and that's how the report's laid out as well. Ben, to acknowledge you, I think it was a webinar I watched years ago where you had a trick where you crossed your fingers when you took a picture or something. And I think that was more in the pre-Spectora days of digital photos of like notating something as a defect. And we picked that up, and even though we don't need to use it anymore, like we can't shake the hat. So I was watching a webinar 5 years ago or so, and pulled this great tip. So we've had agents ask, like, why are you crossing your fingers? Just something that we do. But kind of moving through some of these, and I'll touch on some more than others, and it's been said, I'm happy to answer any questions. But one of the most common things we see are grading and drainage issues. It's, we see it all the time. I don't, we always tell buyers and agents, like, hey, this is such a simple fix, but it's one of the most important things. And, from goes across many different sections of training, but just keeping a home dry, keeping water away from the home is one of the most important things. And you'll often see these downspouts that are just ejecting all that drainage from the roof right at the foundation. And so we use the InterNACHI graphics. Well, we've got a couple of different graphics libraries that we've tied in. But just to show our clients, what is proper drainage versus what is improper drainage. And again, just stressing how easy of a fix this is. It's also fascinating to see the direct correlation oftentimes between improper drainage and a defect within the foundation or settling or moisture intrusion. It's usually really, really easy to draw that correlation. Moving along here, gutter systems, evidence of leakage or active leakage. This is a really important one to look for. In Colorado, we're in a unique climate because it's so dry all of the time. And it's, when it is raining or if snow's melting during an inspection, you'll see a lot of things that you won't normally see on a dry day, but we try to look for evidence of issues that are caused during precipitation. And so there's some things to keep an eye out for there. So just staining, dripping, rusting of gutters. Sometimes you'll see, if it's a galvanized gutter, the bottom side there will be like a pinhole leak. And so you kind of want to keep a close eye on that. Here's one of our minor items, just debris accumulation in the gutters. It's more of a home maintenance issue, but we want to point that out. Really minor damage on the roof. Now, there was a fiberglass roof over a porch structure that did have more moderate damage here that we wanted to note. And again, just noting debris on the roof coverings, just something to just clean off to help facilitate proper drainage. It's really just a home maintenance item. And then this is something that if you get in the mountainous regions of Colorado, you want to be aware of from a wildfire prevention standpoint. I actually just recently moved from Denver up into the foothills, and that's something that I've been really focused on is wildfire safety and home hardening and defensible space. So, again, that kind of brings up the point of, there's a lot of focus on kind of where you are inspecting. Of course, every location has this different considerations. So, in Colorado, we've got certain considerations that, you don't have as an inspector in Florida or Texas or California. And so I've often said we're in a very favorable climate for a lot of things. I mean, we definitely have some unique issues, our expansive soils and things like that. But I'm from North Carolina originally, and I'm really happy I'm an inspector in Colorado and not North Carolina, because less crawl space issues and molds and insects and vermin and things like that. So pretty nice out here with the dry climate and a lot of basements.
It seems like a home inspector needs to know what climate zone that they're in and the geographical nature of things and the soil. But really, even if it's a dry climate, water is the main thing. Water, how it moves, how it destroys things, how it's wicked up and absorbed by different materials. Even in a dry climate, like it's still very important to understand how water moves. It seems like that's what all home inspectors really focus on, because water can just be on the outside. You're starting with the exterior, but man, it shouldn't be on the inside.
Exactly. Talking earlier about a home like a system, you want to really be able to critically think about how water moves. Bulk water like rain and snow melt, and then water vapor. We're really lucky here in such a dry climate that we don't have as many considerations with humidity and moisture vapor. But that's if you're in a humid climate, I have to stress that you really need to understand moisture vapor. Because it's kind of the invisible force that's happening, and you can get what's called like interstitial condensation, where it'll actually moisture will condense inside a wall cavity and can lead to some really big issues. And so, generally speaking, we don't have that as a big consideration in this climate. And so, it has been said, it's really important to understand your climate zone. If I consider myself a very experienced inspector at this point. But if I moved to a different region and started inspecting, like I would have to sit down and take on some education, in that area. I mean, I don't know much about, earthquake considerations and hurricane considerations and all of that. So, I mean, even just here in Colorado, from the Front Range into the foothills and the mountains, there's different considerations. Yeah. So, really, really important to focus on your region as well. Just noting some tree overhangs here. One thing to always look for is dead trees and dead tree limbs as well. I mean, that can be a huge safety hazard. So moving on to the exterior, flat work, settling and heaving, really common here. These are minor, but we did want to notate the cracking. In Colorado, or in the Front Range, we've got these bentonite clay soils, which are heavily expansive and can wreak havoc on flat work and foundations, but more notably, a lot of flat work. And so that's a local consideration that we talk a lot about. Trip and pelmet hazard. I mean, this could almost be considered a safety item, but there's this rebar sticking up in some of the landscaping. Might sound a little alarmist with the title, but if there's kids running around and someone trips, I mean, that's could really be a dangerous situation. Swollen siding, getting back to moisture, we see this a lot, and this would tie into what we talk about, having a proper capillary break of usually about 4 inches or so, wanting to make sure that moisture wicking materials are not in contact with the grade. You'll see that cause and effect often of you've got rotten or damaged siding, and it's because it's been wicking moisture from the flat work or from the ground. So here we had just some cracking in the brick veneer. It is minor, but it's something we want to really at least monitor. It's
what would you consider major, and like maybe a recommendation for a structural engineer? Where do you go?
Sure. So typically we kind of use the over 1/4 inch in space. So I tell people that typically if you can't fit a dime or a nickel into it, it's typically not a huge concern. And then we'll want to take a step back too. And this is kind of, getting into that whole house approach or looking at the home as a system, is really analyzing okay, well, what's, here's the effect, but what is the cause? And kind of taking a step back and going, oh, well, if we think that this is occurring because there was water discharging at that corner of the foundation, which then led to some settling, which is very apparent to us, then I'm not as concerned about it because we have a pretty good picture of what's going on. Yeah. Versus saying, hey, you need a structural professional in here. And of course, I think that comes down to each inspector's comfort level as far as like a liability perspective goes, as far as saying hey, I feel comfortable saying that this is most likely the cause here, versus deferring to a structural professional. I mean, we certainly do defer to a structural professional often, but or when it's needed. I shouldn't necessarily say often, but if it's needed, we're going to call in a structural engineer. But there's a lot of scenarios where there's a pretty clear cause and effect, which we're comfortable with. Maintenance item, just refreshing some caulking. Unsealed penetrations, you'll often see this on gas lines, refrigerant lines, maybe hose bibs, things like that, just to help prevent vermin and insect intrusion. Here we've got a little pergola structure, beam here, the support beam starting to roll a little bit. Given that it's just a pergola structure, not as big of a concern. I actually had a home yesterday. It was a 1900 build, and the rear addition of the kitchen had been built on an old deck structure, and they literally had one of the support posts on the deck was the front porch column. And it literally had the street address on the column. It looked like a wooden leg from a table spool. But I mean, the ledger board connection was separating from the home. The joists weren't sitting on the beam. And then the outside beam and post, it was just kind of cobbled together. And I actually put it as a major item because it, under a heavy snow load, I could see it kind of rolling out and detaching. So, again, kind of judging, well, I'll take a step back. I think it's really important to, look at each situation on a customized basis. I mean, we have the curriculum that we learn through InterNACHI, which is, say going to the DEX course, looking at beam warping or rotation or rolling, but then being able to look at that and apply it to that specific home or that specific situation, and maybe kind of alter the severity accordingly. This is something technically, that beam is starting to roll. Is it one of our main concerns? No. If it were a deck structure or if it were a floor support structure, then it would be a higher concern because of the implications it would have. But I think it's important to kind of be able to think through and go, what are the actual effects of this? If it were to play out. Neutral or negative grading. This kind of goes with the downspout extension item some. Just how is water draining and getting away from the house? One thing I will explain often to clients and agents is you might not have the natural gradient on the site to be able to really have a good positive slope away from the house. A lot of homes, if you go in old Denver neighborhoods, for example, it's a pretty flat topography throughout the entire block of homes. So you might not really be able to manipulate the grade. What is really important is getting back to those downspouts, because the downspouts from the roof system have a concentrated flow of water. So you're taking maybe a quarter of the surface area of that roof and channeling all of that drainage into one downspout. So you've got a concentrated flow of water, whereas the rest of the perimeter of the home and the grade, it's kind of getting a nice, even distribution of rain or snow melt. It's still important, but if you can't really do much with the grade, you want to at least make sure that the downspouts are getting water away. Some leakage here on these old faucets. It's also was not a frost-proof or anti-siphon hose bib, and what that is basically a freeze prevention device where when you shut the valve on the hose bib, it's actually shutting the flow of water off further back inside the conditioned space and not right at the valve, where it'd be more susceptible to freezing. And it also doesn't have an anti-siphon device where it would prevent water from the hose from coming back into the water supply in the event of a pressure drop. Oftentimes we'll kind of, if it's a more minor item that's not quite as integral to the home itself, such as a fence or an outbuilding, we'll still make mention of it, but we'll typically kind of group those items instead of itemizing it. And just, here we just had an old fence and gate structure. So kind of lump that in. Typically that'll be a blue item for us as well, just saying like, hey, you just need some fence maintenance. Landscape irrigation. So this is something that's outside of the InterNACHI's scope or standards of practice. But typically the way we handle irrigation systems are, if, we tell people this is outside of our scope, but if we see anything glaring that's visually apparent, we will make a note of it. I believe in being as thorough as we can be within reason. And so if we see, a flooded irrigation valve box or something like that, we're going to make note of it. But we're not going to test and run and operate the irrigation system. Same thing, outbuildings are outside of the standards of practice, but if we, see, just a rough building, or something that, kind of jumps out at us, we still want to make note of it. I think that's kind of a quick side note. As an inspector, you want to be prepared on how to handle limitations, and that conversation with the clients and agents, because oftentimes you'll be asked, hey, do you guys inspect this or do you inspect that? And if you just go, no, we don't inspect that, it doesn't come off very well. I think being able to say, that's outside of our scope and here's why. That's a much better way to handle it. But just kind of being prepared for those conversations with like low voltage and landscape irrigation, outbuildings, and that kind of thing. And sometimes an outbuilding might be like an accessory dwelling unit, and that might actually be part of the inspection. Just kind of getting a good handle on that.
And we had to change the way we did inspections just from feedback from our customers. Like we got a rash of complaints about the doorbell not working. We're like, and so we just incorporated, all right, we got to ring that doorbell. we're not going to explain it's outside the scope, it's low voltage, you don't have to, we're just going to ring the doorbell.
Exactly.
So you just have to know what your clients are expecting, I guess. And set
exactly. No, it's so true. And I think, that's really important, because at the end of the day, we're a service company, and we're trying to kind of find that balance between, what the standards of practice are, and really what we're required to do on site versus, what people expect of us, and kind of finding that balance and what we're comfortable with. I think a lot of, kind of the average home buyer doesn't realize, what we do behind the scenes. And so they're very focused on like what's in front of them, what they are going to observe. And, I can't tell you how many times that I get in a home and we're just getting settled in, and they're like, hey, did you note this? Did you note that? And I'm like, I will get to that. But I've got bigger fish to fry right now. I'm about to go in your crawl space for 30 minutes, and that's really, if I could only go one place, like that's where I need to be. But being able to kind of empathize with them, and say, oh, I hear your concern, that's something we're going to get to, and really letting them feel like, hey, you've been heard, like we're here for you, is really important. Rust and electrolysis on these window wells. For the age of this home, it's not terribly bad, but you can actually see too, in this particular case, it looks like we may have had some either expansion or contraction of the slab here, as well. But in this case, we did want to note that they're rusting. Uncovered window wells. This is something we typically note. In and of itself, it's debatably maybe a defect, but you want to think about, animals could get trapped in there, someone could step in there, trip, fall, and then it's also an area where some moisture or some water can collect. I think it's really important to, with a lot of these things, to kind of assess the situation again with the clients of, hey, do you have small children that are going to be playing hide and go seek or tag running around this home? They might fall in. I've seen situations before where there's been an egress window well right beside a concrete patio, and I could just envision someone falling in, having a little, barbecue or something. And so that window well carries a lot more weight to me than one on the side of the house where, no one's ever going to hardly be. So it's like where I usually wouldn't mention, covered window wells necessarily in a normal, inspection summary. If it's one that's right beside a path of travel, that all of a sudden takes on a whole new weight that it otherwise would. So kind of getting into, kind of the more heavy hitting stuff here, getting into the electrical. This home had some interesting items, some pretty typical, but then some like you see down here where they had a nice DIY wiring job here, and ran the Romex not within the cavity, and just through the room here. This is where, a lot of this stuff that we've gone over up to this point is pretty typical stuff. But we really started kind of getting in the weeds here with health and safety items. So Missing cover plates. This is a one that we commonly see, honestly, probably at least every other inspection. And we call it as a health and safety item, which might kind of sound like overkill because it's an easy fix. But again, if there's small children or if someone puts their hand in the wrong place, you technically have energized electrical components. And so, we want to take care of that. And again, taking a non-alarmist approach of saying, hey, we're putting this in here as a health and safety concern, but it's a really simple fix. I mean, especially if it's a duplex receptacle, it's a 59-cent component, at the hardware store. Same thing here with like no dedicated junction boxes. You'll have these like flying splices here where basically you're just taking two wires, wire nutted it together, maybe put some tape on it. That should be contained within a dedicated junction box. That's a really common one to see, as well as open junction boxes. You might have something contained in a junction box, but it's not properly covered. You want to pay close attention to detail, because sometimes you'll see really small, kind of easy to miss items like damaged sheathing and exposed wires. Now there's still insulation on the neutral and the hot here, but really, I mean, that Romex sheathing, that cable sheathing should be intact and in that clamp. And then even small things you could easily overlook, like the missing knockouts in the panel. Again, that knockout provides a pathway to get to energized electrical components there. The rest of this has been properly clamped though, so that's good. And then generally speaking, I mean, just going back to this photo, these cable clamps are important because it helps secure the cable where it enters a box, because otherwise if that cable's moved around, it can sever that insulation on the cable, and then could ultimately lead to the hot wire energizing the box as well. And you'll see that kind of thing. We might actually have it here on this report, but you'll see that kind of thing as well on garbage disposals, where they've basically run the cable into the garbage disposal housing, but there's no cable clamp. And that's actually probably the most important place to have one, because a lot of times people will have a garbage can or something under a kitchen sink, and they're constantly moving that cable back and forth, and it could sever that insulation.
These are great pictures. So that I forgot his name. Owen.
Owen
was taking some really good shots. So he's using his phone, his mobile device, to take these while inspecting. I wonder if he had his client with him as well. So he's taking a picture, he's writing the report, and talking to the client as well, all at the same time.
Oftentimes, yes. So we have to be a little disciplined because we all love what we do, and I mean, we could just talk all day, as we go through an inspection, but we've got to stay on time. And so, but oftentimes we do, have our clients with us, at least for a portion. And we try to set some boundaries, especially up front. That's another important thing is, hey, I'd love to chat. We will go through this in more detail. But really, I kind of need to keep my head down and focus. Because it's really easy if you're talking, you might see something and forget to get it in the report, or miss something because you're distracted. But you do, I mean, you need to have the expectation that multitasking is going to be part of the job sometimes.
So in relation to time management, like, are you asking your inspectors to take pictures and video? I saw a video there. At the inspection while inspecting, so that the report is available immediately, or is there a delay in your inspection report?
Sure, that's a great question. So we guarantee a 24-hour turnaround.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's sooner than that. Most of the time it's the same day, mainly because we just kind of want to clear our queue anyway and be done, at the end of the day. But typically the way we go through things is that we'll try to capture the content in the report at the time of the inspection. But Spectora has a great feature. It's a flagging feature. And so if you want to modify the comment, you can flag that comment. And then when you go to edit the report post inspection, you can go back to those flagged comments.
Yep.
And I love that feature because oftentimes, for me personally, I'd probably say 15 to 20% of my comments I'll flag because I want to customize that language a little bit more appropriately for that item. Oftentimes, maybe to kind of dial back like the alarmism of like, hey, we don't, we want to tone this down a little bit because it's not as bad as it sounds in that comment, or maybe it's worse than it sounds in that comment. But basically what we try to do with our template is to make pretty generalized comments that we could then modify with location tags or kind of tagging those photos as well, and say like refer to the photos comments for more specifics. But something like missing knockouts is straightforward. We tag it and then put the photo in and we're done.
Do all of your inspectors use the same comments software, like the template?
We do. So we've put a lot of time into our template, and it's just a constant process. I mean, we're always working on it, we've got it to a pretty good point now, but there's always things.
So from one inspector to another, the report is basically the same. It looks the same. One isn't completely different from the other report.
Exactly. And that's something we strive for, is that consistency. Whether you're working with me or Owen or Lawrence or Matt or Dan, it's all going to be kind of the same general product. Everyone's got different personalities. But when it comes down to, hey, I'm reading this report, I'm generally getting a report. Well, I am getting a report of the same quality, and I'm getting a report kind of through the same lens of the inspector and the same comments. So, that's something that's important to us, and also a big challenge. For any inspectors on watching this webinar that are growing. Going back a few years, one of my biggest challenges was going from me as a solo inspector to growing a company and saying, no, you can trust Owen, you can trust Lawrence, and people going, okay, like I'll take your word for it. And then, now the greatest compliment I can get is like, oh, we don't even need you. Like, we're happy with whoever, because they're an Alpine Building Performance inspector.
Yep.
And so that, largely we've gotten there through creating that consistency. And the template really helps with that.
So if you scroll down, I noticed that there's a video. So you
Yes.
were using a software that allows you to embed videos in your report. You showed earlier that you could do old school PDFs as well, but I really believe this is, I don't know if the wave of the future, but I think video and videos inside a home inspection report is really great.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's one of my favorite features of Spectora. And, it's really nice to have this function for a couple of reasons. But some of the things you just can't really capture in a photo. Like a, noisy system, or, something that you would have to hear. And then, I mean, especially as we all know, the past couple of years have had its challenges, but like during the pandemic, when we didn't have people on site, it was even more important for us to be able to narrate a video. And then, they got the digital report and they were able to go through it, and then, gave us great feedback. That was basically, hey, I was concerned that I wasn't going to be there in person, but now that I saw the report, I feel great.
There's nothing like a video of a active water leak too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's
toilet just flushing all over the place. That's good stuff.
yeah, I wish I could pull it up quickly, but there was a fix and flip that we inspected back in the spring, I think. And fix and flips are always entertaining. They're usually one of the most problematic types of homes to inspect. They don't always have to be, but they typically are. And they had completely forgotten to plumb the drain on the toilet. And so when you flush the toilet, it just discharged into the crawl space.
Oh.
And it was funny because I was training one of our inspectors at the time, and we were in the crawl space, and fortunately the home hadn't been occupied, so there wasn't a lot of effluent at that
Right.
time, but there were some Romax and some pipes and stuff below it, and I saw a piece of toilet paper caught over a piece of Romax, and I go, oh my God, I don't think they plumbed that toilet. And so I said, Matt, go upstairs, flush that hallway bathroom toilet. And I had the video ready. Yeah. And I mean, it was the best video because just 1.6 gallons of water just dumped into the crawl space. And that was such a great video to have, because it just really kind of, sealed the deal there. But yeah, noises, that kind of thing, it's great.
So I think I asked you to open up a window of your busy time for 2 hours. We do not have to go a full 2 hours, but I just wanted to make sure that we're about halfway through. Whatever you'd like to do, as far as you want to do with your time and going through the report, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. We'll keep cruising through here, and I guess we'll just go through this report, and then if there's anything else, we can go through it as well. So just a handful of things on the electrical. Loose fixtures. Here's a video. Loose receptacles. We've got a video on that as well. No power at this receptacle. If you ever come across a situation where you do not have power at a receptacle, you do want to be careful to check, is there a trip GFCI somewhere, especially if it's in a wet location. It's not the end of the world if you call out something incorrectly, but it's not a great look if, someone comes out, a tradesman, and they're like, the inspector just didn't reset that GFCI, and you're like, I kind of feel foolish. I mean, it's going to happen every once in a while, but you do, on those usual suspects, you want to make sure and check, have I explored every option here? Open ground, it's a common one that we'll see. We've got scorching, also a missing cover plate, but some scorching on the outlets. No GFCI protection installed in the kitchen and the laundry room here. So, I just want to address, we've got pretty much 6 comments right here that are all related to receptacles, and well, one's a fixture, but this could feel a little excessive. Clearly the listing agent thought that was the case on this one, but we really feel strongly that we're providing value by giving people specifics and taking them right to the situation, because and you kind of have to use your judgment on a case-by-case basis, but it's not very helpful if we just say, hey, we found 20 electrical issues, you just need to have an electrician. And then the electrician's like, well, what did they find? Where do I go? Like, where are you missing a GFCI? Where is there no power at a receptacle? Because it took us time to uncover all of these items. And so we want to give the specifics I think that's where a lot of the value is. You do run the risk of overwhelming people when they look at that number of like, wow, there were 54 items. But it really helps to kind of give that context. And, we always appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to the client and the agent at the time of the inspection. Really, for us, it's most ideal if they come and say the last half hour or so we can just focus on our job, and then have that opportunity to talk to them at the end of the inspection. But if we can go, hey, you're going to see, I mean, I had an inspection last night or yesterday evening, feels like night because daylight savings time now, but yesterday evening, and I said, you're going to see a lot of stuff on this report, but don't be overwhelmed. Just take it one section at a time. I wanted to detail everything out for you so you do have a thorough list and you can work with your agent to prioritize these things. And, I think it's really helpful that way, but we do try to group things when we can. And we have taken the approach of categorizing our reports by system and not necessarily by location. So, if you have a loose receptacle in a bedroom and then you have a loose receptacle in a garage, we're going to have one comment that's loose receptacle, and then we're going to notate all of the areas. So we really kind of look at things on a system based approach and not on a location necessarily. So here in our attic crawl space insulation ventilation section, evidence of rodents or vermin. A lot of times you'll see chewed materials or burrowing tunnels or holes, that kind of thing. Pretty typical. I usually don't stress it as like an infestation unless it's an infestation. I mean, you're pretty often going to see some evidence of mice or vermin in an attic or something like that, but you can kind of make the judgment call when it looks to be excessive. Here's a good example of just a blue item. Access panel is damaged to the main water shutoff valve. It doesn't have any bearing on the function of the system, but it's something that it's kind of a repair item. We did note here that there's no water pressure regulator installed. This looks like a meter right there, actually, but there's no water pressure regulator installed on the main. We check water pressure typically on an outside faucet, just to see if they're kind of within that 40 to 80 PSI range. Oftentimes we'll see water pressure actually being too high rather than too low when it's coming in from the city. But this is something pretty much water shutoff valves and furnace filters are typically the two things we'll always point out to our clients is, hey, here's what we want you to know where the location of this is. Really important. Here's just kind of a cobbled together shower head with galvanized steel. Used a lot of Teflon tape on here. So functional, but not really proper materials. We always call out these saddle valves because they're prone to leakage. And basically what a saddle valve does, it has kind of a gasket and it clamps down on a copper pipe. And then as you turn the valve, it punctures the pipe and then feeds the supply line. So it's typically a 1/4 inch line. You'll see them for refrigerator supply lines. You'll see them for humidifier supply lines, evaporative coolers, that kind of thing. But they're really common, widespread. People still use them all the time instead of a dedicated valve, but usually over time they will leak. So here we kind of made the judgment call to put it as a blue item, just to say, hey, there is a saddle valve installed and it's likely that in the future it will leak. Whereas if it was a leaking saddle valve, it would have been like an orange or a red, depending on the severity of the leak. Jacuzzi, no motor access panel. There should always be an access panel for jacuzzi tubs. Same if you say had a steam generator, something like that. You always want to be able to access the equipment. And this just made me think of one item, but I think one thing that's fascinating about inspections, and as you get deeper into it and more experienced, you realize that a lot of times you're looking for what's not there as much as you're looking at for what is there. It's easy to a degree to look at a system and find a defect. But sometimes it's easy to overlook and just not catch something that's just not there at all. A good example of that would be a missing register, a missing air supply register, heat source in a room. We're going, wait a minute, there's no register in here. Something like that, or no access panel. So you always want to be thinking about what, not only what's wrong with this right in front of me, but what may I be missing here. And I will say thermal imaging is really nice, a really nice tool for that as well, because a lot of times you'll identify a buried heat register or something with a thermal camera.
Using an infrared camera or some other type of infrared?
For an infrared.
Yeah.
For an infrared. So, I mean, I personally, we use infrared, just standard. It's not something that we upcharge for. I think that if it was 10 years ago and all infrareds were still $5,000 to $10,000, that might be different. But the technology is so accessible now. I think that also it just makes for a better inspection for us even. We use it not just from an energy efficiency or moisture issue standpoint, but we also use it as a documentational tool. While we're on that topic,
what infrared camera do you like?
So like we use honestly the FLIR ones and like the C2s and just kind of the basic ones, honestly. I think for no more than what we do, we don't need the really advanced stuff. I mean, I think if we were an HVAC company, it'd be a different story, but
sure.
We're able to do what we need to do. But let's see here. Well, anyway, I'll hop back to that. But basically, we can use thermal as a way to document that things are functioning like they should. It's, hey, here's the oven, it's working. These elements are on, the refrigerator is working. And, we've been really lucky. Well, part of it's luck and part of it's our process, but over the past 5 years, we've had very few issues. I want to say I kind of worry less, and I should knock on wood here, but worry less and less about liability as we go on, because we've developed a system that really is pretty airtight, and we're able to go, hey, look, like we observed everything that we possibly could, and if it's not in our report, it was probably outside of our realm of being able to identify it. But thermal helps with that because it does show that things were functioning properly at the time of inspection. And we've had issues. We've had issues that were avoided because of that. I had a situation where the agent called and said, hey, my client moved in, the oven's not working. And I was able to go into the report and go, hey, on October 10th, it was working, and here's the photo. And they're like, okay, great, got it. I mean, there's nothing you can say, and I think actually in that situation, the sellers had put a different oven in between the time of the inspection and, the time that they sold the home. And, you'll see questionable stuff like that where, I've seen where someone has taken ice and dumped it into an ice maker, and it's not the right ice cube, and so looking for these little nuances like that, I'm like, this isn't the same ice cube that comes out of this ice maker, and people will try to kind of fleece you with with that kind of stuff. But I mean, that's a pretty nuanced catch, but
Yeah.
we've seen stuff like that. I've pulled up rugs and there's been cracked tiles, and it's, I mean, I think most people act in good faith, but you'll see some interesting stuff too.
Yeah.
Plumbing fixtures, almost always in an older home, there's going to be some, leaking shower heads, loose toilets. We call it these flex drains. Technically, it's okay, but they're more susceptible to clog and to catch debris and hairs. This one's just terrible. Plumbing's interesting. Two things I would recommend are always run every plumbing fixture. And if a house is vacant, or if it's a new build, or especially if it's a fix and flip, run the fixtures more than you would on a home that's occupied. And the reason I say that is that, say if you take a fix and flip, for example, no one has lived in that home to stress those fixtures. Whereas if you pull up to a 1982 split level home and the sellers just left, took their kids to school, and you go in and you still smell shampoo in the bathroom, they just took a shower in that bathroom. And if there's a leak that's going to come through to the drywall and the entryway, you're going to see it because they have been using those fixtures. But if you're in a home that's just been plumbed or has been vacant for a while, that certainly opens up a lot more opportunity for you to find something that hasn't been discovered. So a lot of times we'll fill the tub, we'll really try to stress that fixture, and see something that we wouldn't otherwise see.
Are you still doing sewer scopes?
We do. So we actually subcontract sewer scope. We've got a great company, and I think it's something we might eventually do in-house in the future, but we've kind of made the judgment call for now to say, like, we would rather have a professional company do it. They've got years of experience, and oftentimes the sewer issues are the biggest items that'll come up in our inspections a lot of time, and it's really nice to be able to just defer to them.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of gray areas with the sewer scope. With, say, radon testing, which we do in-house, it definitely has its challenges logistically, but radon's nice because it's kind of black or white. It's like it's high or it's low. And sewer, there's a lot more objectionable territory of, well, okay, there's a circumference crack, but should we replace it? And how bad is this? Or you'll get into weird situations where it might be an issue or it might not. And did they scope the whole line? And
Right.
It's really nice for us just to be like, hey, here, let me give you the information of the technician, and you guys can talk it out.
Yep.
And so we've kind of made that, but I do encourage people to offer that as a service, even as a subcontractor, because it's just, we just want to be a one-stop shop for people. And it's like, hey, the easier we can make it on our clients and agents, the better.
Yep.
Okay, so water heater, we've got a couple of different things here. Pipe corrosion, dissimilar metals, really common thing that we see. You want to look out for that at anywhere really in the plumbing supply system, but especially oftentimes we see it at the water heater. Clogged air intakes. This is a natural gas combustion water heater, and that screen that should be serving to bring air in to feed to help fuel the combustion process is clogged, and the little cause and effect. Because of that, there was an irregular flame. That could be one of the reasons, because it's not getting enough oxygen for combustion. And so looking, another example of identifying something that's not there would be adequate combustion air into the combustion zone. No drip pan. You want to see if is there a floor drain or not. Low temperature. And here's a great, thermal image. Something that just helps us provide a better report. One of the most common things we see are scald hazards where it's 140, 150 degrees, and we're able to take that photo. And just really helps people to see and visualize something they wouldn't otherwise be able to see. So here's one that's kind of outside of our scope, but we still want to mention it, is there's excessive pressure on the radon mitigation system. From my understanding, I'm not a radon mitigation technician, but there should be, 1.5 inches, really no more than 2 inches difference on the water column here. So that's a good indication that there's something wrong within the mitigation system, and to have a radon mitigation specialist assess that. That's, while I'm on that topic, that makes me think we still recommend doing a radon test even if a home has a mitigation system. We get that question a lot, and I'd say, I'm not saying this because we do this as a service, but I have seen enough homes come back with high radon levels with mitigation systems, especially if it's a retrofitted system on an older home. If it's a new home and a new system, it's probably going to be okay. But oftentimes they might not install it properly. Let's see, did I just open up information? Oh yeah, here we go. Dirty, recommend cleaning and service. Excessive noise on the furnace. Again, nice to have a video demonstration. The furnace was short cycling. This is basically where the furnace is turning on and off. A lot of times it's because it's dirty. It'll affect the sensors. So it'll turn on and off and on and off. Filter is dirty, pretty typical. Foundation and structure, no major issues here. We see this a lot where you have brick on top of concrete, and an engineer explained to me that the thermal expansion rate of the brick is greater than concrete. So as it expands outward, it will kind of help to detach some of the concrete there. We see that all the time. It's a minor item. We explain, why that's happening. And then really minor cracks, not concerned at all, but we've kind of made the decision collectively to still note these because we want to avoid someone looking at it later and going, why didn't my inspector call this out? And the more we can kind of take care of any concerns before they become a concern, the better, because we're like, this comment is basically, hey, we saw a minor crack, concrete cracks, there's no issue with it, monitor it, but no issue, and that way they go, oh, okay, well, they saw it too, and they acknowledged it, and I shouldn't be concerned about it.
Yeah, one of the biggest concerns of a client could be like their inspector didn't even see this. Oh, exactly. You didn't even look at that, or you didn't even see that, and actually you did, and exactly. Documenting it would just eliminate all that. You actually saw everything.
Exactly, because a lot of those things you have to think. I mean, I kind of train our team of like, hey, you've got to be in the mind of the client, and if they're concerned about this, you should acknowledge it. And I think that really helps because, sometimes we'll get into a situation and we're like, hey, so, I always like to open it by, if they're there at the beginning, like, just want to go over any questions or concerns you have about the inspection. And they're like, oh, I'm concerned about this, this, and this. And immediately I'm like, those are not concerns. In my head, I'm just like, those, total, like no issues there. Like those are totally superficial concerns, but we still want to, acknowledge that, and and let them be heard, and address those things. And so even if it's not something that we would necessarily document, we're like, you know what, they're concerned about it, let's document it, basically say it's not an issue and move on. And that helps. Wait a minute. So moving down to appliances, debris and the garbage disposal, pretty typical one. Here we've got a cracked cooktop. Must have had the anti-tip bracket, because that's something that we see all the time. There's no anti-tip device. Call out. Sometimes we'll make mention of things too that aren't necessarily an issue, but we want them to be aware of something. So like a good example is, let's say they have a gas hookup for the dryer and not an electric hookup. Not a defect at all, it's just a gas dryer. But I want to make sure that we address that with the buyers and say, hey, I also want to let you know you've got a gas dryer hookup, not an electrical dryer. Or you have the option for both, because they might just assume it's electrical. They go to buy their appliances, they get delivered, and they've got an electric dryer and no way to power it. So I think there's value in that kind of informational element, not just, hey, here's everything wrong with the home. It's like, hey, here are the things that are wrong with the home, and here are the things that'll help you to kind of transition this home more smoothly. No dryer exhaust, or it's not exhausting to the outside, rather this is one of those lint traps. And basically you're creating excessive humidity inside the home, and that should be exhausted to the outside. Here's something we always call out, just that rubber hoses are installed. They're just more apt to bursting or leakage than a braided stainless steel hose. So we want to advise to go with the stainless steel hoses. We noted that there's a heavy odor of air freshener. That's something to always be a little suspect of. If you walk in a home and there's just a heavy air freshener odor, that they might be masking something. Here's a nice demonstration for the floor being out of level. It's using a pool cue. So
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We had a pretty difficult client. It was probably about a year and a half ago, and I think it was just one of those buyer's remorse situations where they just weren't happy with their decision, and it turns out he was giving the agent a lot of trouble as well. But he complained to us multiple things, and every one of them, they were in the report. It was that classic situation. It's like, you guys didn't tell me that my floors were out of level, and we had a video just like this, and it was like, actually we did. It was right in the report. You just need to read it. But the more documentation, the better.
Do you find that clients don't actually read the entire report, right? They just go to the red circle, major defects.
Exactly.
With their agent. Their agent really just wants to take the next step and handle the major problems.
I think that's a good assumption to have as an inspector. It's kind of unfortunate, but to just say my clients probably aren't going to read this report. I mean, that's their problem. If they don't address something and it's in the report and they didn't read it, that's on them. But it's good perspective to have sometimes going into this, going like, they're not going to care about this to the same degree that you are necessarily. Doesn't mean that you should do your job any differently. But I think that like where it might be applicable is like, I wouldn't, a lot of times in like general information sections where you're we list the types of siding, for example. It's like, oh, there's fiber cement, and there's manufactured stone veneer, and there's stucco. Like if we don't list every single siding type in the general info, it's like, don't lose any sleep over that, because odds are they're never going to look at it. It's like, what is important is assessing the home. So really, thinking about like, what are the most important things I need to focus on here? But oftentimes, yeah, I would say probably, if I had to guess, 60% of clients just look at like the summary and then never open it again. And Spectora has an interesting feature, which is really nice. It shows you when the report's been viewed and by who. So it'll say client viewed report, timestamp, agent viewed report, timestamp. And there's been many a times that I've looked and no one's viewed the report. The agent or the client, or maybe just the agent did, or just the client, or just 3 days later or something. So, it's just something to keep in mind. Checking tiles. This is something that's really important, especially these 4-inch by 4-inch tiles, because usually they use those on older homes, and the mastic or the thin sets kind of started to delaminate. Handrail terminations. You want this handrail to terminate into the wall, so that you can't hook something on it. I always kind of use the example of someone's carrying a load of laundry or a string of Christmas lights or something down the stairs, and it hooks, and then it causes them to trip and fall down the stairs. Smoke alarms. We always recommend within the bedrooms and throughout the common spaces. Of course, carbon monoxide detectors within 15 feet. And then just noting improper egress or insufficient egress in a basement bedroom here. That's a pretty common one as well. And it's kind of interesting to see if the listing included non-conforming bedrooms in as conforming bedrooms. They might say, oh, it's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house, and reality 2 of the bedrooms are in the basement and they're non-conforming rooms. That's not really our conversation to have. I think, we note, hey, is this, does this have adequate egress or not? And that's kind of where we leave it. If whether or not they classified it properly, that's kind of an agent conversation there to have with their client. And then one thing that we put into our reports within the past year is just a closing and lockup checklist. We do a really good job of leaving the home just as we found it, but we truthfully had some situations where we left one door unlocked, or we left the heat on, or we left the oven on, and that's never a phone call you want to get as an inspector. And we're all human, and especially in every one of those situations, it was a situation where myself or one of the inspectors was caught in conversation with the client and the agent and the client's father-in-law, and it's like, in that kind of like fury of wrapping up the inspection, something got overlooked. And so this is a way that we can document that we turned off the oven. We can document that we set the thermostat back. We can document that we locked the doors and covered the electrical panels. And at least, even if we don't have every single photo in here, that it's a checklist for us. And oftentimes too, like I hate to say it, but inspectors kind of catch the short end of the stick on everyone that's involved in the transaction. And it's like, oh, it was the inspector that left the door unlocked. And it was like, no, actually we locked it. And then they're like, oh, you know what? There was another showing after you guys were there. Or, oh yeah, the painter did come by to do a quote. And then we're like, here you go. Like you can see. And we've had that situation arise where we get a phone call and they're like, you guys left the house unlocked. And then we send them a picture and we're like, actually, as you can see here, like we locked it, we closed the lockbox.
Hmm.
And then they'll go, oh, that might have been someone else, and so that's something we really like to have in the report. And I think it shows diligence. If a listing agent's looking at this, or the buyer's saying, like, wow, these guys really care. They want to make sure they left the house like it was found. So
Great idea. Great idea.
and Spectora is great because we can just, make that section. It just took us just an hour or so to throw together one day, and now we use it all the time. So yeah, that's kind of a long-winded run through of one of our inspections and some nuances along the way, but hope it was helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Michael has a question. Are there any other services or inspections you found to be a better choice to sub out? Any other things?
So
Like mold, maybe.
we do, of course, inspections. We do radon testing in-house, and we do mold testing. We sub out sewer scope routinely, and we will refer out like lead and asbestos and other environmental.
Yeah.
I personally got my asbestos license in the state of Colorado, but made the call to not offer that as a service right now, because it's kind of one of those things, like the more I learn, the more I realize I didn't know. And it's a whole nother ballgame. To really do it properly, is just a completely separate business. So we refer that out. But I would say it really comes down to like what your personal comfort level is. We don't want to do anything that we don't feel comfortable doing.
Yeah.
And so if I felt comfortable doing lead and asbestos, I would do it, but I would rather defer to someone else.
Yeah. How about subbing out to someone else to do like your marketing? Or
yeah, I think that's great.
What do you do? What do you
So
guys
that's a good question. So I have actually kind of been wearing the marketing hat since day one, and I'm actually this week in the process of interviewing a part-time marketing and sales assistant. So we've gotten to the point that probably I was realistically here a couple of years ago, but realizing I can't do everything myself. And so as we've grown as a company, we've started to delegate and kind of divide up, like, hey, you're going to take training, you're going to take administration, you're going to take scheduling and operations. And so I'm excited that we're at that point in the business where that's starting to happen. It was pretty much me doing everything for a couple of years, and then me doing most of the things until recently. And now, like, we have an in-house radon technician,
Nice.
which is great. Like, that was my life probably changed most dramatically when we brought on a radon technician, because there's so much driving involved.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. Honestly, if radon is profitable for us, but honestly, it's almost more headache than it's worth. Managing the machines, managing the logistics. Now you need to get access to a property twice.
Right.
And then in the summer, windows are open and swamp coolers are on, and it's just a nightmare. But we could sub that out, but that was one thing we felt comfortable handling.
Yeah.
But I think, especially for smaller companies, we're a small company, but no matter if you're a one-man shop or 2 or 3 or 20, I think that the more you can find people that are specialists in that field, the better. And it's going to pay dividends to, have Spectora help you with your SEO or your website or things like that. And it's going to have a much better ROI than either trying to do it yourself or hiring someone in-house to do it. But I think it's just kind of like anything. What they say, like, from business or entrepreneurs, like, focus on your strengths and kind of sub out the rest. And I need to follow that advice myself. I still try to do too much, I think, but yeah. And I would say, it varies. It varies by market too. We're not in an area where wood destroying organisms are a huge concern. I know a lot of companies offer that as, an ancillary inspection or pool inspections, or, anything that kind of, that you could do in your local market. I mean, one thing that we are considering is we're starting to do more mountain inspections as well, flow tests and water quality inspections. And that's something we would feel comfortable with. But we want to make sure we've got, everything in place to take it home.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for taking us through one of your inspections. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
thanks, Ben. I appreciate the opportunity.
you got it. So that's Andrew Sams of Alpine Building Performance at alpinebuildingperformance.com. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you everybody for attending. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me at InterNACHI, and stay safe and healthy, everyone. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Ben.
Appreciate it. Bye.